Hello, today is July 25th, 2013. We're meeting today with Mr. Lee Bashor at his home in Loveland, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Lee, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Well, it's great to sit down and talk to you.
Very good. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
Okay, I have a grandfather that homesteaded on the east side of the Table Mountain, just north of Hygiene, Colorado. And I was born across the road from the homestead, December 29th, 1924. And that's where all my brothers and sisters, I think, went to get born.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Let's see, I had 6.
And where did you fit in that order?
My oldest sister was the first. She's a stepsister because her mother died when she was pretty young. My father remarried. Then there was a brother, then me, and we were only 11 months apart, so we were like twins. Then I had a younger brother and sister who died from the after effects of measles.
Oh.
When they were not even, well, one was a year and a half and one was so forth. Then I had 2 other brothers. So I think that kind of puts it all together.
Yeah. And I tell
And
you,
they're all passed away.
yeah, the last.
Yeah, they decided to go ahead of me so they could prepare the good Lord with the object that he's going to have to put up with when I get there.
So I take it your father was a farmer then as well, or?
He was a farmer, and he wanted to do that his whole life. But he and the banker decided they were going to drill for oil on their land. And they got money together and gave money to the guy to do so. The guy skipped the country, and my dad was left holding the bag because the banker went to his office and killed himself.
Wow. Wow.
So then we sharecropped, and finally we ended up in Loveland, Colorado, when I was about 10 years old.
Let me ask you. I don't know if it's related to the oil incident, but do you have much memory, and was your family much affected by the Great Depression?
Oh yes, because we were farmers during the Great Depression. For example, I got to enjoy thinning beets, sugar beets.
That's not easy
Mom
work.
and Dad would hoe and leave space, and then my brother and I, because we were only ones that were old enough to do so, would follow along, and we would take out the bad weeds and the beets that weren't going to work out so good. So that's one of the things we did as a family. Now, Dad is a farmer. This is pretty hard for him to take, but and my mom, she never finished high school. My dad only had an 8th grade education, but my mom was a very skilled, talented musician.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Wow.
Anyway, so when we moved to Loveland, the first 3 summers, my brother and I and 4 of our friends would be picked up by an old Catholic, an old German preacher, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we'd sit on top of the newspapers. He was the Rocky Mountain News agent for Estes Park.
Oh, wow.
So he'd pick us up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go up to Estes Park, and we'd sell newspapers in Estes Park. And then I got to sell them right on the main street. My brother was at the post office, and my friends had routes around through Estes Park. But when about 9 o'clock came, because we get there about 5,
Yeah.
It was hard to give away a paper, and everybody had what they wanted. So I would take paper and I would hitchhike to Glen Haven when I was 10, 11, and 12. Hitchhiked to Glen Haven and sell newspapers in Glen Haven. I could walk up and back and nobody was getting papers down there. But the deal was that I was supposed to be back in Estes Park before 2 o'clock so I could catch my ride home. And if I couldn't get back in time, I had to hitchhike down to Drake and they picked me up there.
Wow.
So that was my summertime when I was 10, 11, and 12. And from that time on, my brother and I always had a paper route. Even through high school, believe it or not, when I was playing football, the coach had let me go off of practice, go deliver my paper route, and come back.
Wow.
And that's when I was involved in football, basketball, and track, and so forth. So then, as time went along, I got awfully interested in football. To make a long story short, in 1942, the high school football team in Loveland, we only had one high school, we won the state championship in football. We were the top team. We never lost a game. And I was honored to be halfback in the Colorado state team.
Like an all-star
All-Star
team?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was such great fun, but there was a thing called a war broke out. And that's when I was a junior in high school. I'd already met her, and I was having a great time enjoying that, you know. I
Yeah.
got to date her, you know. Anyway, so by the way, the first date I had with her, I was told by my buddies that I had to have a date so that we could go get together at my friend G. Laux' house. So I finally decided to go ask her, and son of a gun, she put up with me, and we went to a taffy pull. A taffy pull. Anyway, these people were friends for life, and by the way, they've all passed away except us two.
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, so war broke out when we were juniors in high school.
Do you remember that day? Remember December 7th? Where you were and what you were thinking?
Exactly. We finally had a radio in our house. Not everybody had a radio. I remember being in school and talking about it, but the exact first time I heard about it, I'm not sure. My wife says that it may have been when we were in church. Believe it or not, we went to church together on occasion, and that was brought up, and it was pretty emotional in that regard. But we knew right away, if you were physically fit, that you were going to have to go. Well, it turns out the coach of the Loveland High School was a guy by the name of Bill Reed, and he was in the National Guard, and eventually he was the commissioner, I guess you'd call him, for recruiting. That isn't the right word, to get people to get into the service.
What part of the draft board, or?
He was also part of that selection too. So anyway, so it was kind of neat that he could inform us about the military and so forth.
Right.
And stuck around even though he was in the military when we finally won our championship. And by the way, he was the first guy I saw when I went into the service. He was there when you were sworn in. That kind of follow-up was great.
Wow.
But the principal in the high school, B.F. Kitchen, he decided that he would give us a quick course in aerodynamics. And I jumped on that one because I was interested in that. And it turns out he was a World War I pilot, but never saw combat. So anyway, we got that introduction to aerodynamics, and when time came for us to be inducted, before that time, I went through the cadet aviation courses and was accepted into the aviation cadet program. So they ask you to go to school and graduate, and then you'd be called in. And sure enough, that's what happened. So I was called in and went immediately to the aviation cadet program and went directly to Shepherd Field, Texas in July.
Now, will this be July of 43?
July of 43.
Now, prior to that, did you have an interest in flying, or was that your whole idea was to be a pilot?
Well, I was really interested in it, but I didn't have any way to make contact with that, you know. And playing football, being involved in sports kind of took up her time.
Yeah.
Plus,
couldn't probably afford flying lessons.
Yeah, and I had to earn money because my mom and dad my dad didn't want to work for anybody. He wanted to be on his own so bad that he always made every effort to make sure that he had something to do so he didn't have to go to work for somebody else. And my mom taught every kid in town piano lessons.
Wow.
And that's kind of the way it went. But for example, when we were up in Estes Park, the idea was to earn $1 a day and have enough left over so you could get your lunch. You had to buy your lunch, and you had to buy all your school clothes and your books and all of that. So we became interested in being entrepreneurs and self-sufficient. I try to talk to young people. I like talking to young people. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We want people to be productive citizens. Okay, if they're not productive and citizens, you're going to be a problem for life, for yourself and others. Mm-hmm. So when I talk to young people about their school, they talk about excellence, and I say, well, you can be excellent in something, but if you're not a productive citizen, what a waste of time.
Right.
Okay,
right.
So we want you to be excellent, but also be productive citizens. Anyway.
Well, let me ask you before we continue on to when you go off to the Army. Was there any thought? Were you entertaining any thought of going on to college to play football? I mean, did that end a college football career?
Oh, yes, I was interested in that, but I knew I was going to have to survive on my own. My parents wouldn't be able to put me through school. Yeah. Plus the fact that Dale Dodrell turned out to be an all-pro linebacker for 9 years. He was on our ball club.
Wow.
Okay. So that's the kind of people that we had.
Yeah.
So anyway, went into service, Shepherd Field, Texas, Wichita Falls in the summertime.
Oh.
So I learned to shut up, sit down when you were told to, and do all those good things that you had to learn to salute and so forth.
I guess that begs the question too. How was that transition going from civilian life into military life for you? Was it?
Well, because of the sports activity that I'd had, and also the association with the families that we had, I think I was well prepared, and then I didn't have any problem with it. I was proud to be a part of it, but I don't know. It was the only main thing I remember is I got a big boil under my arm, and it had to be lanced, and that saved me from having to go on a 5-mile march because they had to lance this. Anyway, so from there, that was about 8 weeks. About 8 weeks to two months, Then the next activity was college training. So we went to Canyon, Texas, to what was Canyon, Texas? I was trying to think of the name of the school.
That's fine. It's okay.
Just a small school.
Yeah.
And they gave us some physics and chemistry and so forth and so on. But there I learned to run.
Oh, really?
I really did enjoy the 5-mile runs that we had to go on each day. I just thought it was good training, good exercise. And I got to fly on the first airplane I was ever able to fly in. It was a Cub. You didn't get to do anything with it. You just sit in there and play a little bit. Then you went for 8 weeks, that was about 8 weeks to 2 months, to what was called classification. Now there you go through psychological tests and physical tests, agility tests. You shoot the firearms and so forth and so on. And then they decide whether you're going to be a pilot training, navigator, bombardier, gunner, or wash out. Okay. That was an interesting experience. Give you an idea, in the psychological test, they had 6 of us go into a room, take our shoes off, and sit there and wait for, assume a doctor to come in. When he came in, he would ask people in the room questions, and each one of them would basically stutter or have awful hard time trying to answer the questions. Psychologically, some of them just, it was interesting.
Huh, wow.
The experience of how people react to all kinds of interesting things. It almost got funny for me. I almost had to watch myself so I didn't laugh. And he asked me to say, as fast as I could, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, and I was just as bad as that.
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah.
Okay. And then he said, well, if the Japanese Zero comes, attacks you from the rear, what are you going to say to your crew? I said, shoot the guy. And that was my interview with the thing. And to make a long story short, I think at that point in time that I was probably chosen to be a first pilot, not a co-pilot.
Really? Oh, interesting.
I think they had me scheduled that way from all of the psychological tests. And from there I went to Hemet, California to fly the PT-22, a single engine, open cockpit thing, taught by civilian instructors. And gee, it was just all kinds of fun. You spent 90% of your time him cutting the throttles and saying emergency landing. And you would have to figure out where to put that thing down. And he'd stay with you until you were darn near down with your wheels on the ground before he'd add the throttles to it. Spent a lot of time doing that. I learned how to do a snap roll, a really good snap roll.
Describe a snap roll for those little watches.
Oh, a snap roll is where you stall the airplane, you pull it back, and you pop your stick back and kick the rudder, which direction you want to go. And then when you roll around, and then when you want to stop, you kick the other rudder and pop the stick. And that was fun because if you went to another location to fly for the day, they took you through grapefruit orchards. Guess what? He would drive slow enough so you could go out and grab a grapefruit. So then from there, I went to Taft, California to fly a BT, that's a B as in Baker, BT-13. Now the BT-13 was a bigger, more powerful airplane, and what was neat, I learned a little bit of formation flying And I got started in doing instrument flying. Instrument flying, you would have a buddy, because it was a two-place airplane, although you were inside, okay? So you'd have a buddy that would be watching while you were under the hood, and you could fly the airplane under the hood. That was great, and
When you say under the hood, you mean literally something over, you're just
Yeah, you
looking
can't see
purely,
outside.
you're just purely looking at instruments,
yeah,
correct? Uh-huh.
yeah, and that became a really important thing. In the formation flying, my buddy, or my instructor and his buddy, they liked to fly in formation upside down. So when the BT didn't have a pressure fed fuel system, so you had to work a wobble pump to keep the engine running. So one would fly and the other one would work the wobble pump upside down.
Wow.
And it was that kind of fun.
Hmm.
And from there we went to fly the AT-17, which was a twin-engine airplane made out of string, plywood, and glue.
Hmm.
But a great airplane to learn some instrument flying again, night flying. And I bring this up, instrument flying, because in combat, the whole time I was, and even in just getting to Europe, weather was the most important problem that you're gonna have.
Right, right.
Anyway,
Now, at this point, did you have a preference whether you wanted to fly single or multi-engine planes, or were you even given a choice?
no, weren't given a choice.
Oh, okay.
They didn't ask you, did you want to do this?
Yeah, yeah.
They said, you.
You. Yeah, okay.
Okay. So I earned my wings, I got my instrument rating, I got a commission, and I was told that I was to go to Hobbs, New Mexico to become a B-17 first pilot.
Wow.
Oh, what a deal, man. And as luck would happen, this lady showed up, and I informed her we were going to get married.
Wow.
So anyway, we came home, and sure enough, we did get married. She didn't turn me down. She, after 69 years, I'm not sure she's got it correct yet, but you know, anyway. So after getting married, I went to Hobbs, New Mexico, and what a neat deal, be able to fly a B-17. It was like going from a Model T to a Cadillac.
Wow. Huh.
And it was, I couldn't have picked it better from the standpoint of my interests and whatnot. I really wasn't too interested in being a P-51 pilot, for example.
Yeah.
Anyway, so at B-17 training, give you an idea of the kind of thing that you went through. There'd be 3 guys, students in the airplane, so you'd be taking turns. But here's the kind of thing they would do. You start down the runway, just about the time you pull the wheels off the ground, he'd cut one of the engine throttles. So you'd have to catch it with your rudder and have a full power on this thing. And the only way, and eventually, before you made your next turn, he would cut another engine on the same side.
Mm.
And you had to hold it with your knee locked.
Oh, jeez.
Okay, this is the kind of training that I got, was absolutely excellent. And how to fly that airplane and how to recover from it, and so forth and so on. Anyway, it was a great experience. Spent as much time as I could in the Link Trainer. This was a flight trainer thing that you could use to learn to fly instruments. Have you ever heard of a Link Trainer?
No, please, once again, describe that.
I have a picture.
Oh, well, yeah, we'll pull out the picture later on.
You might
yeah,
be
yeah.
interested in that, okay? So, finished that training and was sent to Lincoln, Nebraska to pick up my crew. Now, I'm 19 years old. And what they did was they had probably 30 crews lined up with the tail gunner at the end of the theater row up to the co-pilot. And they would bring the first pilot's attention, then you would march in. When they said halt, there was your crew.
Oh, wow.
So you didn't get to pick them either. Okay.
Huh.
Went from there to Lincoln, Nebraska for overseas training. This is where your crew is supposed to get together and go through different mock missions, so to speak. But the first thing that has to happen to a first pilot is he has to be checked out by the colonel, some higher ranking officer and whatnot like that. Well, on that flight, only your crew chief that you had just picked, nobody else but the instructor and the crew chief. So on that flight, came in, did everything they wanted me to do, came in, and as I touched down, my crew chief liked to beat the heck out of me. He was so pleased with the performance that he just really let me have it.
Oh, really?
What a confidence builder that was.
So that would have been the first time he'd flown with you, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Oh, okay.
None of the rest of the crew.
Yeah.
So I had to give you an idea. Here's another experience with people. The bombardier was 32. We thought he was an old man. I was the youngest guy on the crew.
Jeez.
Well, the bombardier decided that he didn't think he had to go through all of the exercises after all he'd been through, this and that and so forth. So I went to the commander in the base and I says, what are we going to do about this? And he says, well, the only thing I know you can do is restrict him to the base. His wife was in town. So, sure enough, I restricted him to the base. Guess what? He met all the other formations after that. Oh, God. And it was interesting, the training of each crew. As time went along, I got to know each crew member and what their training was and whatnot like this. I spent most of my time in the pilot training that I was supposed to have time doing other things, trying to teach my co-pilot the things that he should have learned in training.
Huh.
And it turns out that he spent time as a co-pilot on gunnery flights. They would fly gunnery where the gunners could go shoot their
okay,
guns.
right, okay. Uh-huh.
Okay, so he really didn't go through the experience I had. I didn't really figure that out
Yeah.
until we were on our way overseas.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, so if we were successful in accomplishing the things at overseas training at Rapid City, we would get to fly our airplane overseas. An airplane, not ours.
Okay.
Okay. So when we completed that, we went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and she stayed with me. She hounded me, you know. For example, one night I said in my sleep, "Wake me up when we go over the cone of silence." And she's wondering, what the heck am I saying? You know, well, what I was doing was I was telling the co-pilot that wake me up when you go over the cone of silence, which you have to figure, you have to find that or you don't know how to fly instruments, okay? So that's how intense that was for me, trying to get him, and she thought I was losing my...
So she followed you after you guys were married, your
Yeah.
various bases before you went overseas?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we went back to Lincoln, Nebraska, we knew we were headed overseas. We stayed there for a couple weeks or so. Finally, one night in January, I think it was January, 45, we got the instruction, the paperwork to fly to England.
Wow.
So We took off in a blizzard.
How was that departure though? When saying goodbyes, I mean that had to be tough. I mean you were going into the unknown, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember?
It was really unknown.
Yeah.
But I had so much on my mind as to the crew and what you had to do just to get to England, you know. So I had a lot on my mind, and it was unhappy to have to leave her.
Sure. Yeah.
My mom even came to see us before we left. My dad came to see me in Rapid City before we left. That's another story. Anyway.
Well, I mean, we talk about flying into the unknown, but I mean, there was a lot known by that. I mean, what was going through your mind? I mean, up to that point, the 8th Air Force took incredible losses. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, did that psychologically play into a 19-year-old's mind? I mean, what were you thinking when it's like?
There wasn't anything you could do about it. That's kind of the way it was. You do the best you can, and hopefully it'll work out, I guess. And spiritually, I thought I was blessed. Okay.
Wow! Oh, wow!
Okay. Anyway, taken off from Lincoln, Nebraska in a blizzard. So it was on instruments instantly. We couldn't, and it was at midnight, and we had to get to Manchester, New Hampshire. So we were catching radio range legs. I don't know whether you know anything about instrument flying, but the Morse code system that we had was a thing. It's kind of like you got an X mark here, and you have a signal that's an end and an N, and the opposite A and A. You put da and da dit together, and you get a steady signal. The only time you know where exactly you are is at the cross. It's a silent cone of silence. That's the only way you know exactly for sure where you are. Now that's what you had to fly to Manchester. New Hampshire. Okay, so we'd pick up a range leg here and another one here and another one. And I knew my co-pilot was still learning, okay. Anyway, we finally got to Manchester, New Hampshire. It was clear morning, so we landed, and there was so much snow that we had to land quite a ways away from the airport headquarters and had to walk carrying our stuff in. But this was a brand spanking new airplane, and very interesting airplane. Anyway, we were there like about a couple weeks, I think, and I got on the link trainer, and I got as much time on that thing as I could possibly do, because from there on, there wasn't that kind of thing available except in a very important place. And the next place to stop was Goose Bay, Labrador. Anyway, we took off from Manchester, New Hampshire, immediately got on instruments, and the wind was blowing like crazy, minus 60 degrees temperature, and we weren't that high up. We were flying like 5,000 feet above the surface primarily.
But for those that don't know, the B-17 wasn't pressurized, so.
No, it wasn't pressurized, and you didn't have heat.
Yeah.
And it turns out on the leg that we had to fly, we were flying like this because we had a crosswind of 90 miles an hour. So it was like you were flying in a skidded way, you know. That's kind of the sensation you have. Caught the cone of silence. Now the turnaround is where it really becomes difficult, because if you miss and don't do that right and get back to the cone of silence, you won't know where the heck you are or how to get back in. So it was extremely critical that turnaround be made, considering the crosswind and all of that. Anyway, we've got the turnaround, came back in and hit the cone of silence at the right altitude, and when we just hit the cone of silence, we cleared and we could see the runway.
Wow.
So here I was again, I was asking the co-pilot, go ahead and land. So I racked it over and asked him to go ahead and land. First thing he did was cut the throttles. Guess what? we had a 90-mile-an-hour headwind now, but you didn't want to cut the throttles because there's a squall coming. And you gotta get this thing on the ground, because if you don't and you miss this runway thing, you're gonna have to make this procedure turnaround again. So I jammed it down, leveled it off, on instruments, I was able to know I was level with the ground and close to landing situation, but the squall hit, so I'm having to hold it like that on instruments. When the squall went away, we had landed and we were rolling backwards.
Really?
Yes, the best landing ever made. And of course, it took all 4 engines to get us to the end of the runway, because now it's minus 60 degrees temperature and a 90-mile-an-hour wind. You couldn't get out of the airplane without being totally covered and somebody holding on to you.
Wow.
That's the kind of condition it was. Well, from there, the next morning it was super quiet, so nice, so neat. You could even hear somebody walking, crunching the snow a block away.
Huh.
I flew to Greenland. In Greenland, the airport is at the end of the fjord.
Yes, I've heard about that.
It's like flying up the Big Thompson Canyon. Of course, the fjord's
Yeah,
right.
right, yeah.
But to land there, you had to be right on the deck. You had to fly up this fjord until you got to a recognizable spot that might, and in my case, there was a little ship that was wrecked. And I knew if I found that and a knoll just beyond it, that I could probably find the runway.
Probably.
Okay? So you get to this knoll and you make a hard left turn, straighten out, and I said to the co-pilot, you can go ahead and land, and he couldn't see the runway. So he's done cut the throttles, and that's where you had to cut the throttles to get in. So by the time I just couldn't let him continue, I jammed the throttles back and racked it over, and we came in to land. But you can't go around there because it's a cliff, or you have to land. However, so whatever situation you're in, you have to make it.
Wow.
So I had to push it down on the runway, and the thing you do is you say to the co-pilot, stand by, tail wheel. Because if you can't stop that airplane with the brakes before you get to the end, you spin it.
Oh, man.
So I said, stand by, tail wheel. Well, we didn't have to spin it. So we stayed there for a couple of weeks and took off for Iceland.
Now, at this point, what was your confidence in the co-pilot? What was the co-pilot's confidence in himself? And did you guys talk about that at all? I mean, what were your thoughts? I mean,
I'm now 20. And I am evaluating these things.
yeah.
I had great confidence in my radio operator. So I knew I had somebody, I ended up calling him my hero.
Really? Wow.
Because he was that good and I could count on him, and it provided tremendous support. So I talked to the co-pilot, but he just, I don't think he heard much of what I was saying, okay? And I put as much time in giving him time as I could. So taking off, I learned something about another crew member. Took off from Greenland, you had to go, at the end, you had to make those left turns and come back out of there and go out over the ice cap. Now, I was warned that don't try to do dead reckoning before you leave Greenland, because the pattern changes due to the weather circumstances in Greenland. And we're there in January and February time period.
Mm.
Okay, so this is not summertime. So when I got to the, time-wise, to the point that we were to make the heading to Iceland, my navigator said, "Would you please turn 90 degrees to the left and fly for 15 minutes?" I knew I had a problem because somebody didn't tell him, don't try to dead reckoning, because that's all you can do. There isn't any radio range leg up there or anything like that. So I said, I will make a left turn, I'll fly for 5 minutes. I made the left turn, straightened out, and decided this is stupid. I'm gonna make a 180-degree turn and take out on the heading. And I said to the navigator, get your sextant out. Unfortunately, it was weather. You couldn't use it anyway.
Oh.
So we took off from Greenland. By the way, he was a good navigator. He just didn't have the opportunity to use his skills.
Mhm.
So we took off for Iceland, trying to consider the wind conditions and all of that. And after the time period that we thought we ought to at least see something, I asked the radio operator to get a fix. Now, you weren't supposed to have radio communication because the Germans would give you improper information.
Oh, right, yeah, right.
So you only had to do this if it was something you didn't have any other choice. He got us a heading, we made a 90-degree turn, and about 5 minutes we were seeing Iceland. Asked the co-pilot to go ahead and land. I thought this was a good opportunity, see what he'll do, and I'll just sit here and see what. With the B-17, you put the nose on the end of the runway at the right glide speed, and that thing is gonna put you down where you need to be, no matter what you do. It's just really dead sure it's gonna do good for you. We went over at the end of the runway, we were still 500 feet up. In other words, he didn't do that. I says, what's the problem, or what's your plan? He said, I want to make a peel-off landing. Well, you have to get permission to do that.
Now what's a peel-off landing?
That's go over the airport, chop the throttles, never add the throttles again, and come in and land.
Oh, huh.
Peel-off landing. Well, all he had to do was give me the information, and we could have, anyway, I turned it around and got it down. Anyway, so we were there for about a good week, I think. And kind of interesting thing, we went to the officers club, and they had a movie and so forth, so that's the first chance we had entertainment. And the radio operator, I took him into the officers club.
Was he enlisted?
Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway, and we got talking about after we came from the theater. Did you notice anything unusual in the theater? Yeah, there was an interesting odor. And so we didn't think much about it. And the next day we got to talking to the base people, and we told them that it was neat to be able to go there and appreciated it and so forth, but it was kind of an unusual odor. They said, were there any Iceland ladies sitting there? Yeah, just in front of us. He said, they use the fish oil for cosmetics.
Oh.
Anyway.
Well, that's a whole, up to this point, it must have been fascinating, because I imagine, like many of your generation, growing up, you probably didn't travel too far away from this area, and now your training took you zigzagging all around the country, and now you're up in these exotic locations. It must have been a fascinating experience.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And the women's complexion was absolutely perfect.
Hmm.
Just really good. Anyway, we finally decided we could take off and go to Valley Wales. Another experience with the co-pilot. He wanted to see how long he could hold the airplane on the ground. Why, I don't really know, but see, he hadn't had the experience.
Huh.
Figuring this out. So I said, okay, but we're gonna be in the soup again. So I tried to not show it, but I put my hands and whatnot to protect, so that when he finally pulls back on the stick, he doesn't do it so that you whack the tail. Okay, sure enough, and I caught it. We get up and we're almost immediately on instruments, and he starts to turn to the left, which takes us into the mountains.
Oh.
And I take it away. And I couldn't convince him that he was turning left. I said, you're making a left turn, you can't make a left turn. No, no, no. Anyway, so the navigator did a super job, got us to England, and as we approached Valley Wales, we noticed a carpet-like effect coming off the ocean. This is the fog rolling in. You've never seen anything like this. And I knew that if we didn't get down on the ground before that hit the runway, we're gonna be in trouble, because there isn't any way to navigate up there, okay? Well, there is a way, but I'll tell you about it later. Anyway, so we hustled and landed the airplane, got it parked, and this stuff rolled in. No kidding, you couldn't see the hand in front of your face.
Jeez.
It's that interesting. And I thought I was sleeping in a bucket of water. The place I had to sleep, the blankets and everything were just
Damn.
seemed wet as heck.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Anyway, so the next day was kind of a fun experience. They made the mistake of having B-24s and B-17s on the same airfield. And we were transferring our airplanes to a depot. We didn't get to keep
that's
these
right.
airplanes.
Oh, right,
We had
okay.
to take it to a depot. So they would have a B-24 takeoff and a B-17 takeoff. But the next guy to take off is gonna show that he can take off quicker, sooner than the guy that just did it. And this went on to the point that it was getting to be really a problem. The commander of the base got on the horn and said, the next guy that tries that, I'm gonna have him court-martialed. Anyway, so we took off and flew to the depot, left a brand new airplane, and then we're transferred by train to Molesworth, England, the 303rd Bomb Group.
So at this point, up to this point, you were just coming over as a replacement pilot. You hadn't been put in a replacement crew. You hadn't been put into a unit yet, then, huh?
No.
Okay.
We were assigned to go there before I left.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Okay.
that was our assignment.
Okay.
I still have the orders.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, we get there, and you're segregated. First pilots in one hut, and co-pilots in another, and so forth and so on. Except in my case, they booked my co-pilot and me in with the first pilots.
Oh, really? Huh?
It was, why, I don't know, I didn't, but it was a good thing, because after I had flown 2 or 3 missions, I don't remember exactly how many, the first pilots in that hut told the headquarters that I wasn't supposed to fly another mission. I needed to have some rest because I was having to fly the airplane 8 to 10 hours on flight every day. So they thought it was best that I get a 1 mission rest. knowing that the problem with the co-pilot.
Oh, right, yeah, yeah.
I didn't say anything
Right,
to
right.
anybody, but they knew.
Well,
When
okay.
I would transfer and he would fly it, immediately they were having trouble staying in formation. Anyway, first thing that happens to you when you're a first pilot and you get overseas is the colonel has to take you for a ride to see if you can fly the airplane. You and your crew chief, and I think the radio operator went in this case, because there was, may need him for navigation. And he was my hero, I could count on him. Anyway, Colonel Cole took me for a checkout ride. Colonel Cole graduated from West Point, and he was all West Point. Okay, he even had a place for him to be in his cottage by himself. I mean, he had his own special little, he wasn't in with the other guys. Anyway, so Colonel Cole was going to have me go up and he's going to check me out. So I take off and everything going fine, and he says, now, I don't want you to touch the stick or the pedals, anything. What are you going to do if you have your control system malfunction or shot out? What are you going to do? He puts it in an attitude like this, and he says, now what are you going to do? Guess what? You flip on the autopilot, and the gyros aren't up to speed yet, so you don't know what you're going to get. You may get further on your back, okay? But if you've practiced right and trained right, you can't look down there because you have to look outside. Those little knobs you turn to get this thing erected and get it back up. By the time you do all that, the gyros are turning so that now you have control. So I would imagine that there are a lot of guys that didn't play with that autopilot enough to recognize how to handle it. Its use, yes, but in that kind of a situation. So I passed that part of it, and then the next thing was he wanted to show me how to do a peel-off landing, because this is critical. Landing 33 airplanes, you need to be able to come in 3 times. Each element of the squadron of 13 airplanes needs to land one time, the next time, and the next time. Get all 33 down by making 3 passes. So you have to be able to get that thing down properly. And the way you do that is you come up the end of the runway, you chop your throttles and you bend that rascal over, and you pull, you horseback on it, and you bring it around and get it down on the ground, land.
Wow.
Now the problem is the guys kind of, I guess you kind of chicken out in a way. The second guy maybe doesn't rack it over quite as quick. And you get further down the runway, too far down the runway, until finally the last guy of the 13 is way down the runway, okay? So you're not getting much of a peel-off landing, so it's those first few guys that have to do this thing really slick. So the colonel showed me what he wanted to show me. And as we were coming around at the runway, we began to shudder. We're quivering, the airplane's going like this. And I pours the throttle to it. I don't know whether he did this on purpose or whether he didn't do it on purpose.
Right, yeah.
And we went around the control tower. And I was a good friend of his. Colonel Cole and I were good friends.
Is that right?
Yeah. Anyway, I landed the airplane and he was pleased and things went fine.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That's where all that good training, previous good training came into play.
Yeah,
Looks
and having a co-pilot that was having problems made me look at things differently too, and think of alternatives. What could I have done, or what should I have done, or how could I have done that different? So I think it made me better prepared.
Yeah, right, right.
For a lot of things, yeah. So that's the way it was, and it turns out, interesting, think of it, you have 33 airplanes in formation. To go on a mission, at that time of the year, it's usually bad weather.
Yeah.
So to get that many airplanes in the air in a way that you can complete the mission, you have to take off at 15-second intervals. And the only thing that you have to help you is you're flying, watching the exhaust from the airplane ahead of you, and instruments. So you're flying instruments, watching that exhaust until you all get up there, and that they're all doing this. Once you get up close enough, and if you stay close enough, if you didn't stay close enough, you're not going to find the darn squadron. And you might get into some other squadron's activity. So that's the kind of activity you had to fly formation and go.
I heard that's as dangerous as actually being over the target. I mean, just between the weather and flying so close with accidents and what have you, that just sounds incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, you got to really know what you're doing, and you got to have really good skills and confidence. So, anyway, that was the kind of thing you had to put up with.
Wow.
Now, mission-wise, I don't know how. Do you want to go into those?
Well, yeah. If you'd like to talk about some of the missions that stick out. I mean, how many missions did you fly?
I flew actually 22 combat and 2 non-combat. The non-combat ones were as much fun and dangerous as the others.
When you say non-combat, are you classifying that as a milk run, or is that something entirely different?
No, non-combat, after the war ended,
Oh, okay.
we were informed to put as many of the ground crew in the airplane as we could and go on a simulated mission. So we would form just like we normally did, 33 airplanes, and you take off.
Huh. To give them an idea of what
it was like. And once you got over Europe, you could wander away.
Wow.
So I got to wander away, and I wanted to fly down the Rhine River.
Wow.
So as soon as I could, I found the Rhine River, and we could look up on the bank. Went past the cathedral at Cambridge.
Or Cologne?
Cologne,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Cologne. We were looking up at the steps. The cathedral was spared.
Yeah.
The town was just
Right.
literally destroyed.
Right.
Yeah. And so I got to do that, and then kind of as a finale, I kind of wanted to see the Eiffel Tower, because we obviously weren't that close to the Eiffel Tower
Right.
with
Yeah.
being flying at 30,000 feet or so. So the fun thing for me was to be able to put my wingtip on the Eiffel Tower and come around.
Wow.
And you do that, you rack the thing over, and you have to put a little bit of aileron on it, but you just horse it back and come on around. Anyway, that was fun.
How many tourists get to experience the Eiffel Tower from that perspective, huh?
That was the first non-combat one. And we came in, and it was nice. We didn't have to go through instrument flying much on that one. The next one, the second one, we took off in bad weather, and we were they were trying to keep us in clear, not in the clouds, for obvious reasons. So as we were leaving England shores, we were low to the ground, I was flying looking up at the wheel well of the tail gunner up in front of me. That was my position. And I glanced at my altimeter, and it was kind of like 100 feet or so. It was, and I said, this is not gonna work. So I called the guy up and said what my altitude said, and I'm starting to climb. And from that, they decided to break off that mission. So with all 33 airplanes now sitting around in the muck up there, trying to find our way back.
Oh, boy.
But it was a real hazardous thing. It was probably, shouldn't have ever tried that mission.
Hmm.
Anyway, we made it, got back, waited for, a week or so, and they decided that it was time to send us home.
Hmm.
So I haven't talked about the mission.
Yeah, let's back up and talk about some of those 22 missions that stick out in your mind,
Yeah.
and take us through a mission.
Okay, I'll take you through a mission. Normally, I had 12 500-pound bombs. Sometimes you had other things, like this particular mission, I had leaflets. So we had a pretty normal takeoff and whatnot. But this was to Berlin.
Oh, wow.
But we were encountering a lot of anti-aircraft fire. And we were having trouble with one of the engines. So we were now flying on 3 engines. Not too bad. That's not a big deal. With leaflets, you don't have near the weight. But before we got to the initial point to make the bomb run, an aircraft shell went through the bomb bay.
Really?
If we would have had bombs
Bombs.
in there, you wouldn't be looking at me
Yeah.
today.
Wow.
Okay, we had leaflets scattered from one end of the airplane to the other. And we went over the target, and after the target, we had problems with another engine, so we were now on 2 engines, but I was able to hold formation with that airplane. And you have full power on 2 engines, and you're cooling off the cylinder heads by adding a little bit more mixture, fuel mixture. So we were fighting that kind of thing, and I was obviously getting tired, so
Yeah.
I thought it's time for the co-pilot. Guess what? He couldn't hold formation. He began to drift off, and he would try all kinds of things. Change the prop pitch controls, change the manifold pressure controls. He just didn't have the spatial reference, I guess you might say. So we came back on our own on 2 engines, and I worried, and the leader said, you were holding formation, you get back in formation. Okay, well, I couldn't. Once you get that far away from it, you couldn't. I should have caught it sooner, so it's my fault. I'm responsible.
Yeah.
I should have gotten back. Well, fortunately, we didn't have anybody attack us. We were on our own, but we got back okay. That's one mission. Another mission. And I don't remember exactly where it was, the target. Anyway, as we were taxiing out, well, the way things work is the pilot is usually the last guy to get in the airplane. The crew is supposed to have it checked out and ready to go, so that when you can't do 15-second intervals to take off unless you do this properly, so that has to be click, click, push, pull. So I get in the airplane, and I'm taxiing down the runways, down the taxiway, and I notice RPM on one of the engines doing this, the needle. So I don't know whether it's a prop pitch control or what it is. So I asked the co-pilot to check it out. And you usually check it out by running the prop pitch up and down and doing the proper procedure. And I'm having to go down this runway, or the taxiway, and Colonel Cole says, "I don't want to hear your brakes on the taxiway." And there are turns and kind of little uphills and downhills. This is his way of making you stay proficient, smart. So I'm not able to tell much about what's going on because I'm having to do this with throttles, not brakes, and get in line and so forth. So it's, as we get to the end of the runway to take off, I asked the co-pilot, is everything okay? And I'm paying attention to the guy going to take off, and I'm getting in position, and I'm holding the brakes now, and I'm revving up the engines and so forth and counting down. And I didn't get any answer out of him. So we got full power on, and we're headed down the runway, and that particular prop was running away on us. So the only way you handle that is you feather the prop. So I said, feather number 3. Guess what? He feathered number 2. I unfeathered number 2. I'm trying to take off and feather number 3. And we're struggling to get off the ground. And we're doing that kind of thing. We're going long for, I thought it would like half an hour, it seemed like, just get this thing off the ground enough. So I got it under control and called in and told them the problem we had, and they said, we noticed. What do they recommend? If you can control that engine, continue on the mission. So we continued on the mission. We finally caught up with the squadron just as it got to the point of turning for the bomb run. And we were all by ourselves, all this, and there was a B-24 over to the right, and the German jets were, not the jets, the Germans were attacking that B-24 like crazy. They didn't even come close to even wondering about us.
Wow.
So we lucked out on that mission. And got back, we got home on 3 engines, so it worked out. Another mission that I think that's probably, the weather was so bad over England that we had to form over France. So lined up to take off. You're not following anybody else. There's just doesn't make any sense. Put the throttles to it, start down the runway, get the wheels up, and we're immediately in the soup, and we got hit by lightning. And what it does is it kind of blinds you for a while, and here you are trying to fly instruments, and you can't see the dang instrument. Okay, guess what? The co-pilot unbuckled his seatbelt. He's bailing out, and I says, "Sit down, Baker. Turn on the lights." So he sat down, got back in his seat, turned on the lights. So we flew instruments into France just by taking up a heading, because there isn't any reference waiting. So we did find the leader over France, which was unusual, but only about half of the squadron actually located the leader. And the weather was just that bad.
Wow.
So as we were, we took off after that rendezvous for the target. So we were, like I said, not as many airplanes, but we were going in and out of the clouds. And the way you do that is you hold formation as tight as you can, and when you go in the clouds, you peek at those instruments and you hold. Well, the natural tendency is for people to back off or roll over or pull away. And so when we'd come out of the clouds, you'd have a different set of guys there.
Really?
No kidding. And I was concerned about navigation and coming back. I felt that our best chance of survival is stay with it. Would you believe by the time that we were getting close to the target, I was the only guy on that leader of that particular segment. Everybody else is peeled off and landed somewhere else.
Huh.
So as we were approaching point to go on the target to get rid of our bombs, the B-24 squadron came right head on at us. Had to chop the throttles, bend it over, try to stay in formation. You're going in and out the clouds, back out again. And we recovered from that, came back over and went over the target, dropped our bombs. And I followed and stayed with this guy till we got back over France. When we came out of the clouds, we were chasing the cows.
Oh.
And I said, I don't like this because we've been lucky so far. I asked for permission to leave the squadron of just this one guy.
Yeah, right.
But give me a heading, because his navigator surely has to be the only one that knows where we are. Because he's navigating this whole thing, and he's not having to put up with clouds like
right.
our navigator couldn't do anything. No way to do anything. Anyway, so we got permission to do that. So we came back up in the clouds a little bit and took up the heading. And when we got back to where we thought we were close to England area somewhere, guess what I did? Asked the radio operator to get a fix. My hero.
Yeah.
He got us a fix, and we, sure enough, came right back to the airfield. And on that mission, I don't recall, but a good portion of the squadron never made it back that day.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there were a lot of them that landed somewhere else and that didn't make it back that day.
Wow.
So that's typical. What else? I don't know.
Well, you know, on a mission, I guess what I'm interested in is, to me, there's three parts in my mind. Three parts of the mission: going to your target, while you're over the target, and then that evening when you're back laying in your bed and you got time to decompress and think about it. I imagine when you're over the target, or maybe going there and when you're so busy doing everything that you don't really think about it. But what's it like that night, particularly in a scary situation like you went through? You're laying in bed, it's dark, you're laying in your cot, and you got time to finally think about it. I mean, what's that like?
Just what happened? What's going on? Flying that airplane, keeping it where it's supposed to be, and hopefully keeping everybody safe and alive. That was what I was thinking of. I can't do anything about the rest of it.
Yeah, right.
So that's kind of the way I took it. For example, on one mission, on 3 missions, we were attacked by the jets, the 262s.
Oh, that must have been an interesting sight to see those for the first time.
Oh, it makes your hair curl. The first time I saw a jet it was going the other way. And we knew we were in trouble. They had 4 cannons firing forward. And the B-51, all it could do is just make one dive at it, and that's it. So on one mission, they spent about 30 minutes attacking our squadron. And I know of a lot of guys that have been in this kind of situation that never even saw a jet. Well, on 3 different occasions
Wow.
we saw a jet. But this particular occasion, you can imagine the airplane vibrating, all guns firing. The airplanes are just shaking like heck. I don't, and it's just something, and I'm trying to get as close to the next guy as I can, because the closer you are, the more protection you have, and the more firepower you have at the guy. Anyway, my tail gunner went kind of berserk. He started firing these guns, and he fired it until he burned up the gun. The gun quits firing.
Right.
So after that mission, I tried to find a way to kind of help him recoup, because on the next mission, we tried to give him something to do to occupy his time. So we asked him to do oxygen check. Do you know what that is? Well, every so often when you're up and you're on oxygen, you need to check everybody out to see if they're still alive or if everything's okay.
Wow.
So he would get on the line and you'd say oxygen check, and then each place would have to report in. Well, when the jets hit us the second time, he started calling oxygen check, and he just kept on calling oxygen check until we got clear out of danger. Then we had to get back there and get at him. He just yelled oxygen check.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
boy. Huh.
You never know.
Hmm.
People react interesting. Everybody doesn't react the same way.
Yeah.
This guy was a neat kid. Anyway, that's the type of thing that happens. Interesting thing about the bombardiers and the navigators. Think of 33 airplanes flying, how many bombardiers and navigators do you need?
Really, just your lead one, correct?
And the guys, and the guys are sitting up there. They can fire guns, but their job is practically zero.
Yeah.
So they're sitting there with a lot of anxiety, nothing to do. That's the worst thing you can have, is somebody doing nothing, not anything to do. Anyway, I thought about that a lot after the war. They wanted to be what was called lead crew. Well, we were asked to be a lead crew, but I wasn't too interested in being a lead crew. I was concerned about the bombardier. And the navigator. I thought they were okay, but I wanted to get, this is something I shouldn't have done. I wanted to get my missions in and get home.
Oh, sure. Oh, fair enough. Yeah. You weren't alone there. Yeah.
So when they asked us to be a lead crew, I said, I think the bombardier and navigator probably want to be lead crew, but I'm not too interested in that. So they promoted me to a flight commander of one of the other squadrons, the 358th. For the last mission, I was officially on a 358th, but they never ever transferred me on the records because the war ended, so I stayed with the 359th.
Hmm.
When they tried to promote me to captain, the colonel said, not the colonel that I had a checkout ride with, but the colonel that had to decide on advancements, said, can't you find somebody that's at least 21 years old?
Jeez.
I finally made it to captain after the war ended.
Wow.
Oh, gosh.
Well, let me ask you a few questions about life, just life over there. In today's age, we've got instant messaging and cell phones and computers and such. Talk about your option, talking or communicating back home. A little bit about that.
Yeah, well, you had the email. I
The
think it was
V-mail?
called. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
V-mail. So I tried to write those. I was flying missions basically every other day. Okay, so I wasn't spending much time writing, and
Yeah.
that was unfortunate for her.
Right, sure.
Because
Not knowing.
when the war finally ended and we were waiting to and I got to fly crew home. I didn't bring my navigator or bombardier home, but none of my crew that I took over there ever even got a scratch.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, so we communicated that way. I didn't get any, I don't remember getting a letter at all. I tried to send letters and I didn't do a very good job of doing that because I was busy
Yeah.
thinking.
Now, would you, as the leader of your plane, would you have to censor your crew's mail, or would somebody else do that? That they would send home? Did you, were you involved in it? And, because I know all the mail had to be censored before it could be sent home.
Yeah, but I don't know how they did it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I know that your mail went to some way of checking.
Okay, so you weren't responsible for having to censor any of your,
No.
okay, yeah,
Nor anybody in my crew.
yeah.
I found out where my high school buddy was, and I went to visit him. By the way, he was a tail gunner, and he never even fired his guns. He never had a combat situation where he had to fire his guns.
Is that point?
And he got 35 missions in.
Really? And now that's what you would have been required to do 35 before you could go home and work?
When I was there, it was 25.
25,
When he
okay.
was there, it was 35.
Oh, okay.
Because they were replacing crews and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
So probably at that point, we owned the skies and there really wasn't a lot of German fighters up there when,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can you imagine each mission that I was on that particular day would have at least 1,000 B-24s or B-17s?
Oh, that must have been a sight. I can't imagine what that was like.
It's hard to believe,
Oh,
to
wow,
imagine.
wow.
At least 1,000. The last mission of the war I was on to Czechoslovakia. We took off in the normal way. When we were halfway there, they told us that they'd been informed that we were coming,
Right, yeah.
okay? And so they told us before we left that if you got shot down, they might meet you with a pitchfork.
Right, yeah.
I made sure I had my .45. We had to bomb that target visually. We couldn't do it with radar. And by the way, the radar system wasn't very accurate anyway in the first place. It's no wonder we blasted everything, because the accuracy of that wasn't good. Think of it, each airplane with 6,000 pounds of bombs,
Wow.
33 airplanes.
Hmm.
It's incredible.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, we had to go over the target, made 3 passes over the target. So they really shot the heck out of us on the last mission. Probably got as much damage on that mission as any. Coming in to land, oh, you saw airplanes collide, you saw all kinds of crazy things coming in to land. 2 airplanes ahead of me, first one capered off to the left, the next one capered off right, the next one to the left. I went right down the center of the runway.
Oh, man.
Oh,
Wow.
man.
What's it like to be coming into a flak attack? I mean, describe what flak is to those that are watching, and what it's like to fly into something like that.
Is really a big hand grenade, where the pieces of that thing just fly all directions, small pieces. So
Chunks of metal.
it's metal.
Yeah.
And so it just makes all kinds of pockmarks on everything. So it's like a big hand grenade.
Hmm. Wow.
And when if you're close enough, you'll see a fireball, and you'll see a puff of black smoke. You know you were close when that happened. And I've seen an airplane just totally disintegrate. I'd be looking flying the airplane here, and out of the corner of your eye, you see this other airplane, poof, it's there, and then it's gone. That's kind of the feeling you had.
Wow. Oh, man.
Yeah. Working with the crew, when they would track you, sometimes they just throw up a blanket of flak, or they would track you. Well, in the tracking part, the crew would tell me what's coming. They would say it's coming up on the left side, or it's coming up on the right side, or so that hopefully they would think that I could move us one way or the other. And honestly, I didn't have a whole lot of option, but I would try to give them some motion that would make them feel like
Oh, right, yeah.
because the crew chief, the guy with the top gun up there, we were on a mission at lower altitude, and Colonel Cole was the leader in this thing, and we were being tracked and being really hit a lot. The crew chief up there said, if the colonel doesn't change course, I'm going to shoot him.
Oh, jeez.
Now that's kind of, well, how about my co-pilot when we were being hit by the German jets? He's supposed to be watching the instruments that I'm flying. He rolls back his window, takes out his .45, and he's shooting the gun. That's what he's doing.
Really?
Yes. And he had the gall to say he thought he shot one down, you know? There's no way. Even if he'd hit it,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
how would he know?
Yeah.
Bang, bang, bang. So, you never know how people are going to react.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's another question too. I mean, here's a 20-year-old kid. I mean, you'd grown up a lot, but you technically were still a kid.
Yeah.
I mean, already under the stress of war, but you, I think, had the additional stress of you had men's lives in your hands that you had to take care of. That there was that stress, and then probably not a whole lot of confidence to the guy sitting to your right. I mean, how did you deal with that? I mean,
I just did what I had to do, I guess. But you know, playing football and playing in sports and being a team member was really vital. I learned how to be a member of a team, and my job was what it was, and that made a big difference.
yeah.
And I think selling newspapers or having to survive as a 10, 11, and 12 and be responsible for my actions, so to speak, and my support, all those things add up, I think, to say you learn how to survive.
Yeah. Okay.
And I didn't figure it was survival so much as I figured it was your job.
Wow.
You gotta, that's what you have to do. And you don't have a choice. You don't ask, why am I here?
Yeah. Right.
You're there because you have to be there, you know? So, anyway.
Pray a lot.
Yeah.
You pray a lot.
That's been a real neat experience.
Yeah. Well, talk about. So you were in England on VE Day then, when Germany surrendered.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like personally? I mean, it must have been a relief. And what was the reaction of the base? Or
Well, at the base, everybody was tickled to go home, you know, but you still weren't home.
yeah. Okay.
Coming home, I knew I was going to get to fly an airplane home with the crew, and but we had to wait for about 2 weeks for the weather to clear up. So I flew home by way of Iceland. We skipped Greenland, went to Goose Bay, then flew into New York. When I went into the office in New York at the airport, guess what? I ran into several of the guys I went through pilot training with that never left the United States.
Is that right?
Yeah. They said, where in the heck have you been? They had been ferrying airplanes around the country. They never got to combat.
I'll be darned.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Then I got to catch a ride on a train, troop train, to get home. And I slept in a boxcar. The train it was a troop type of train. So the only place I could find to sleep was in a boxcar. And I got so much soot on me that I had a hard time opening my eyes.
Oh boy.
Anyway, I finally got back to Laurie Field and got to get a bus to come home. I got to Longmont and I was concerned because I guessed that maybe she hadn't heard from me for probably a month. So I stopped and got her sister to take me home from Longmont to get here. So came home. And,
Were you able to get word that you were coming? Did you know he was
No,
coming?
she
She didn't?
No. The way she knew I was here is she heard me walk up the back steps.
Oh.
Thump up the stairs, and I knew it was Lee.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So the mail didn't go very
Yeah.
well. The communication wasn't too good.
It must have been a wonderful homecoming. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was. And then I had to go, so I picked her up and we got a train back to Greensboro, North Carolina. And they were going to, I was going to transition into the B-29.
Oh, and head to the South Pacific? Or to the Pacific Theater then?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
Japan going on. I wasn't too enthusiastic about flying the B-29 because they had engine problems.
Right, yeah.
Anyway, as it turned out, Greensboro, North Carolina, they assigned me to go to Columbus, Ohio, where I was to train West Point graduates to fly the B-17.
Oh.
But ultimately, they were looking at me transitioning into a 29, but the war ended in Japan.